Hey fish friends, how's it going? Hope you're doing well. My name is Zenzo from Tazawa Tanks. Now in this video, I'm going to talk about aquarium filtration. Hopefully from this video, you will get a better understanding of what aquarium filters do, and also maybe this might help you decide which one is best for you based on your needs. Well, the first thing that we want to do is we want to understand what is an aquarium filter. And I know, duh, an aquarium filter filters your aquarium. We know that part. But more so, we want to understand what are the functions of an aquarium filter. And all of the aquarium filters have similar functions, but some of them have some different functions as well. So fundamentally, aquarium filters have three main functions. The first function is mechanical filtration. Mechanical filtration means that you are removing particulates, things that are floating around in the aquarium, things that you can see, things that don't make the water look very clear. They make it look cloudy or dirty. They remove those from the water. So basically what they're doing is water is passing through the filter. There's some kind of mesh, some foam, some filter floss, something in there that's catching those particles, and then you would remove that and you do not see those floating around in the water. So that would be mechanical filtration. Another function of an aquarium filter, depending on the type, is the ability to add chemical filtration. Chemical filtration is just that. You are adding some type of chemical in the form of, it could be a carbon block or a sack of carbon, it could be a resin, it could be some other additive, some other chemical that you are putting in a filter to remove phosphates, ammonia, nitrates, etc. from the water chemically. They're absorbed into the resin or whatever media that particular chemical is using, and you would then remove that and refresh it or toss it and put in a new one. So that would be the second function of an aquarium filter. The last function and the most important function, in fact, if you had an aquarium filter and it only did one thing, this is what it needs to do, and that is to offer biological filtration. Now, biological filtration means that you have beneficial bacteria, which you cannot see. There's little tiny bacteria that live on the surfaces of everything in the aquarium. In fact, us as humans, we have live bacteria that live on our skin, which is why some people say don't use too much of like an antiseptic or something because you remove some of that beneficial bacteria. But anyway, in the aquarium, you have beneficial bacteria that live on surfaces. Everything that water is touching, there can be beneficial bacteria. That means the glass, the substrate, rocks, decorations, etc. There's bacteria that live on those surfaces. However, the majority of the bacteria live in your filters. What the beneficial bacteria does is it removes those really harmful waste products from the water by basically consuming them. So think of bacteria, if you're not familiar with bacteria, think of them as like little miniature single-celled animals. I think they're single-celled, but little animals that are eating the waste, right? So they're eating the ammonia, they're eating the nitrite that's in the aquarium, and they're converting their own waste into nitrate. Now, I know that's not really how it works, but that's kind of a simplified, idea for people that may not understand how it works. So they are converting those harmful toxins in the tank, the ammonia, the nitrite, into a less toxic byproduct, which is nitrate, which we can easily remove from the aquariums by doing water change or by having live plants in the aquarium, etc. that will help absorb those nitrates out. They basically use it as fertilizer. So those are the basics of what an aquarium filter does. Now, there are lots of different types of aquarium filters. There are sponge filters, hang-on-the-back filters, canister filters, internal filters, internal fluidized filters, fluidized beds, sumps, natural filters, all kinds of filters, and they all do different things, but at the fundamental base, they all do biological filtration. Now, before choosing an aquarium filter, knowing what we just talked about, it's important to understand what your needs are. So that means what kind of fish are you keeping? What kind of tank do you have? Do you have a planted aquarium? A lot of choices that make it pretty easy because of the plants. Do you have like a heavily stocked cichlid aquarium where you've got lots of big fish that eat a lot and poop a lot and create a lot of waste, and then that's something that you're having to manage? Do you have a saltwater tank? Do you have a reef tank where you have delicate corals and other things living in the aquarium that might be more sensitive to changes and harmful elements, and so you really have to be on top of your filtration? So there's a lot of things to consider before you choose your aquarium filter, and then hopefully what I cover today in this video will help you give you a better understanding as far as which one to choose. Now, other things to consider are things like price. What can you afford? Can you afford to spend $300 on a large canister filter? Or do you have a smaller budget where you can only afford maybe a hang on the back filter, or even less where you can afford like an inexpensive sponge filter for $10 or something? So that's one thing to consider, is the affordability, but then also think about long-term affordability. Does your filter require you to have lots of electricity running? Does it require you to replace parts all the time, or insert, cartridges or filter floss or whatever all the time to make sure that it runs properly? And then also other things to consider are things like maintenance. How much time do you have to take care of your aquarium? Hopefully you have a moderate amount of time so that your tank flourishes and you can take care of your fish, but it might be a situation where you just don't have the time and energy to clean filters all the time. It's not really what you signed up for. You just kind of want a plug and play situation that kind of takes care of itself. And then also the other thing to consider is aesthetics. How does that filter look? Oftentimes when we think about filtration, we're thinking about what's the best filter for the aquarium, not really thinking about what's the best filter for me to enjoy my aquarium. So when I'm sitting in my easy chair, when I'm sitting in my fish room and I'm looking at my tanks, what do I want to look at? Do I want to look at some giant internal filter? Or am I okay hiding something behind some plants? Or do I want to have something that's totally like can't see anything, everything's hidden, and I only want to see fish and rocks and coral and plants or whatever it is? So now let's talk about some of the different types of aquarium filters and kind of talk about their pros and cons and which one might be best for you. So starting off, let's talk about the sponge filter, which happens to be my favorite filter. Well, kind of, sort of. We'll get to my other favorite filter at the end, but it's one of my favorite filters. And the reason why is it's so easy to use and it's really economical. I can run all of these aquariums down here in this room off of one air pump and just drop air tubing into each of my aquariums and run a sponge filter, which means there's only one thing that's plugged into the wall, and that's the air pump. I don't have to have 25 different things plugged in here, hang on the backs or canister filters or other things. I can just have that one thing plugged in, run air to every aquarium, and I have instant biological and mechanical filtration from those sponge filters. So it really does make it very easy. So I would say sponge filters, very easy. There's no moving parts, really nothing that can break. Yeah, they can degrade over time, but that really takes years and years. And if you're talking about a $10 sponge filter that might last you 5, 6, 7 years, and then you have to get another one, that's really like, a couple of dollars a year. So really not that bad when it comes to costs. Now, even though they are wonderful filters and they are my favorite, there are some limitations. For one thing, they only do 2 of the 3 functions. They do not have the ability of having chemical filtration. So they can do a good job of biological filtration. In fact, they're amazing for biological filtration because there's so much surface area on that sponge. And then they can also do a good job of mechanical filtration by sucking up those things that are floating around into the sponge. So the other thing to consider, though, is that besides that not being able to do the chemical filtration, which might be an issue for some people, is for some, they're not very aesthetically pleasing, and I can understand that. You may not want to look into your aquarium and be staring at 2 or 3 or 4 sponges just kind of sitting there blowing bubbles. Now, if you can hide them behind rocks or pieces of driftwood or plants, and I've done a really good job of doing that down here to where you kind of almost have to look for the filter in the aquarium in order to see it. For the most part, they're hidden behind, whatever I have in the aquarium. They're pretty good job of disguising them and camouflaging them so you don't really see them. And for me, it's not a problem, but for some people, that could be an issue. And another thing to consider, depending on the size of your aquarium, is that a sponge filter will take up space inside of the aquarium because you have something that might have, a 5 or 6 inch diameter footprint, and it might be 6 or 8 inches tall, and you're putting that in your aquarium. So that's taking up that volume of space where your fish might have been swimming before. So if you have a smaller aquarium, having a medium size or larger sponge filter may not be ideal. But in a lot of cases, it's still very manageable. It's perfectly fine as far as the water volume because it's not taking up like a lot of space as far as water is concerned. It's just kind of more of an aesthetic thing, and it might take up space if you have a lot of them or if you have a smaller aquarium. The next filter that we are going to talk about is a hang-on-the-back filter. Now, a hang-on-the-back filter is very common. In fact, it's probably the most commonly used filter, or around just because they're relatively inexpensive as far as plugged-in filters, and they're very versatile, they're easy to use, and overall they do a really good job. Now the good thing about a hang-on-the-back filter is it can do all three functions. It can obviously do biological filtration, which all filters do. It does a very good job of mechanical filtration because the water that is in the aquarium is drawn up through this tube. It passes through filter media that catches those particles, and it does a great job of removing those particulates. In fact, I don't use hang-on-the-back filters very much anymore because I like to simplify things, but there are times when I will plug one of these in and fill it with media and just stick it on one of my aquariums when I'm trying to get a little bit of extra mechanical filtration to remove some of those things floating around in the tank. So they're very good at that. And then also they do have the ability for you to use chemical filtration by having space for you to put stuff in. So here is an example of a hang-on-the-back filter, and inside there's a chamber where you can have like different sponges and filter media. You could put bags of charcoal in there, or Purigen, packs or whatever, or just stuff it with sponges and call it a day. And so it does all three of those. And as I said, they are relatively inexpensive. They're not like some of the other filters out there. So even a large hang-on-the-back filter, for the amount of water volume that they're moving, they're relatively inexpensive. And as I said before, they're easy. Now there are some drawbacks to hang-on-the-back filters, and some of the drawbacks are why I personally don't use them. One of the drawbacks is it's going to have to be plugged into the wall. And now it's fine if you have 1 or 2 or 3 aquariums. It's not that much of a big deal. But when you have 30 like me, I'm not going to have 30 to 50 of these things plugged in all over the place. It would just be cost prohibitive, and it's going to be a drain on my system here, and just not something that I'm really wanting to do. The other thing is that I don't like having water outside of my aquarium, meaning that this hangs on the back. That's why they're called hang-on-the-back filters. So if this were the aquarium, it would hang like this, and this part would be outside of the aquarium. Now this is a plastic box, so water usually won't leak, but in some cases you might have something blocked or clogged, and you will have water flow out the top of the aquarium, and that could end up on your floor or something like that. So that is something to consider. I have seen them fail before, like where the motors are mounted, if there's a bad seal, and you could get leaks as well there too. So that is something to consider if you do live in a situation or an area where even getting a gallon of water on the floor would be catastrophic. Then definitely this would be something to think about before moving forward, because you could have that situation if you're not up on top of maintaining them and making sure that they're not getting clogged and possibly overflowing. Another drawback that I would say is that they do take up space outside of the aquarium. So for an example, because this is on the back of the tank, you can't have a tank close to the wall. It's got to be away from the wall, enough room for you to be able to keep this behind the aquarium, but then also be able to get back there and service it and reach it and stuff like that. So something like this, you're going to want to have, easily 8 to 10 inches behind the aquarium for you to have enough space to maintain it and move it and all those kind of things. And depending on how your room is set up or your fish tank is set up, you may not want to have that away from the wall. Now, I know I keep saying that these are great filters, and the more I talk about it, I'm just saying all the bad things. I'm just making sure that you guys are aware of the pros and the cons, and there's lots of pros to these things. Another con would be that they can be a little bit noisy, so depending on the type that you get and how you have it maintained and set up, you could get some of that kind of motor noise. You could hear the fan running, not the fan, but the propeller running. There are moving parts, so there is a potential for them to break. But overall, great filters, just things to consider before moving forward. The next filter is a very popular filter. In fact, a lot of people love these. I'm not a big fan, even though I do have 3 of them running for a couple of different reasons, and that's a canister filter. Now, a canister filter is an amazing filter if you can put up with some of the shortcomings. So a canister filter is a canister, so we're looking at a large basically filter device that is outside of the aquarium. Sometimes it's like a oval shape, kind of like a bucket as an example. They have some that are maybe more rectangular in shape. They come in different shapes and sizes depending on the size of the aquarium, etc. The great thing about a canister filter is there is tons of space inside of that canister for you to pack it with filter media, meaning that you're going to get excellent mechanical filtration. You're going to get amazing biological filtration, and you also have space on top of all of that to have a place to put some chemical filtration if needed. So there are a lot of different aquariums that can run on canister filters because of that. Now, the downside to a canister filter is that they are expensive. Some of the good quality canister filters out there are $300-ish, sometimes a little bit more. So that's a big bill to pay for some people, especially if you have a lot of aquariums. You're not going to want to have 20 aquariums all running on one canister filter each, because that could be thousands of dollars worth of just your initial cost of the filter. Additionally, because it is plugged into the wall, again, we have that same issue of having to draw electricity. So if you have multiples or electricity is an issue for you, then a canister filter might be something that's not ideal, despite the fact that it is an amazing filter. Now, another good thing about a canister filter is actually also a con, or something that's not great, and that is servicing the filter. So a canister filter is large. They usually have a powerful pump in there, so it moves water very well. And it doesn't need to be serviced very often, meaning that you can go sometimes several months, in my case a little bit longer, because I just hate cleaning them so much. I've actually gone a year without cleaning a canister filter before, and I made a video about it, which a lot of you thought was crazy. But sometimes I might not clean a canister filter for several months. In fact, the one behind me in this African cichlid aquarium, I probably haven't cleaned in about 6 months or so, and it is overdue. Now, I do have sponge filtration in there as a secondary filter, so but still, it is something that I don't look forward to doing because it's messy, it's heavy, it's arduous, it's not a fun project. However, if you don't mind that, and you're only doing it once every few months, ideally maybe once every 2 or 3 months, you're maintaining that canister filter. Those other times you can leave it alone. You don't have to worry about it. You don't have to worry about it overflowing because it's completely sealed and contained. You don't have to worry about changing things inside of it because you'll just get to it when you get to it, whether it's 3 or 4 months down the road. So the pros and cons are you can kind of set it and forget it, but once you do have to maintain that filter and take care of it, it can be messy. And for me, depending on the filter, it could be like a half an hour job that, it's not fun. So anyway, things to consider for the canister. The next filter that I'm going to talk about is probably the filter that's least used in the hobby. In fact, when I had a service business, when I used to clean aquariums for clients, I almost rarely would ever see one of these, and I don't see them very often, and that's an internal filter. Now, an internal filter is a filter that you put inside the aquarium. So very simple, it's an internal filter. Now there are different types. There's I have a couple of the fluidized media ones, like the Zis filters. There are also basically they're like little mini hang on the backs that go inside of the aquarium, or miniature canister filters that go inside of the aquarium. And essentially what they are is they're a plugged in device that you could plug into the wall, and water is drawn through the pump, and it's pumped through media and then shot back out into the aquarium. So it essentially does the same thing that like a canister filter or a hang on the back filter would do, but it's all contained inside the aquarium. Now the good thing with that is that you don't have to worry about spills. You don't have to worry about water spilling out like it happens with a hang on the back filter, or when you are maintaining your canister filter and you've got to unplug everything and take it out, and there's usually water that ends up on the floor or somewhere. With an internal filter, that doesn't happen because it's all inside of the aquarium. Now, the downside to the internal filters, most of them do not have the ability to add chemical filtration if that is a need of yours. So they usually do a great job of biological filtration, which is their main function. Secondary is they do some mechanical filtration, and then most do not have the ability to have chemical filtration, although some of the newer models might. Now, the downside to that, in addition, is the fact that it's inside the aquarium, so then you have that aesthetic issue. Now, because it's attached to the glass usually, or it might be hanging from the rim of the aquarium on the back or something, it can be kind of an eyesore because you're looking at it. It's a little bit harder to hide than a sponge filter, which is usually down on the bottom of the aquarium, and you can kind of easily put a rock or a piece of wood or a plant in front of it. Or a internal filter, it's much more difficult to mask and hide and camouflage. So if aesthetics is an issue, then that would be something to think about. The other thing is that, again, it's plugged into the wall, so it's drawing energy. So if you're trying to be economical, it might not be the best bet. The next filter I'm going to talk about, which is actually my favorite filter, although I only have one of them running because it's not the most economical, and it does have a lot of those negative things that I talked about with the other filters, and that is a sump filter. If you're not familiar with a sump filter, a sump is essentially a body of water contained in some type of container that's used as like an overflow. So a lot of times people will take like an extra aquarium and put it underneath their main display aquarium and put all their filter media in there. You can also have sumps that are made out of plastic or some kind of other synthetic material. You can pretty much make a sump out of anything as long as that material is safe for fish and that it's durable and strong enough to, you know, withstand the pressures of water, etc. So empty aquariums like a 20-gallon aquarium or 40-gallon aquarium or 55 underneath your main tank often does a great job of acting as a sump. Now, the great thing about a sump, there are so many wonderful qualities about a sump, and I could go on and on talking about how wonderful they are. But basically, they are very versatile because you can add pretty much anything into them: chemical, biological, mechanical filtration in there. You can have things like refugium. So if you have a saltwater tank and you want to have some kind of plant that's absorbing the waste out of the water, you could have macroalgae in there, you could have mangroves growing out of there, so you could have like a little planted section for your saltwater aquarium that's drawing that out. You could even have refugiums for freshwater tanks, like cichlid tanks where you can't have plants in there. You can put them in there in the sump, and they'll kind of do the same thing without the fish destroying the plants. But in addition, you can hide equipment like, obviously in the reef world, you're going to have your skimmers and all that kind of stuff in there, your reactors. Freshwater, you could have your heaters hiding in there. You could have UV sterilizers hiding in there. So there are things that you can hide in the sump that don't need to be in your main aquarium. All you need is some way for the water to drain out of your main aquarium into the sump, and then a way for it to be pumped back into the aquarium. So they're very versatile, but that is also where the issue is that you're removing water from your tank into another tank, and again, we have a chance for getting water on the floor, and usually sumps are responsible for the most amount of spills and problems when the power goes out, etc., that some of the other filters don't have. So it's a lot more of an expert type of filter. So usually people that have sumps are very experienced with fish keeping, are very experienced with filtration, or they've done a lot of research and trial and error before they got it right with their sump. So those are things to consider when you do get a sump. Is that something that you're really ready to tackle? Because it could be more than you're ready to chew, and might be something that you don't want to address. But if you do, it can be very rewarding. Now, they're great for, you know, the large display tanks, saltwater tanks, cichlid tanks, but they're not necessarily great for multiple aquariums unless you can afford it, again, because you're having to have a second aquarium for every aquarium that acts as a sump filtration for that tank. And again, you're gonna have to have something plugged in. You're gonna have to have some type of way of getting water, either an overflow box or having your tank drilled, which can be a little bit dicey. So lots of versatility for a sump. They are my favorite because of that versatility, but because of the complexity, it's not really great for me as far as having lots of them, and I don't like having lots of things plugged in. So hopefully that kind of helps you understand what a sump could be good for. The last filter we're going to talk about is natural filtration. And natural filtration, is just said, it's just using something that's natural to help clean your water, to filter your aquarium, and mainly it's biological filtration. So plants, as an example, is nature's way of filtering water. Plants would absorb the phosphates and nitrates from the water and basically purify it and make it safer for all the inhabitants in the water. So plants can do that. We talked about refugiums for saltwater tanks. They kind of do the same thing. So plants is a way of natural filtration, a way of naturally filtering your aquarium. I have seen some fish keepers that don't have any filters except for like an air stone, just for some movement and some surface agitation to have oxygen for their fish, and plants. And it's not something that I've done before, but I have seen it done with some success. So that is a way of naturally filtering your aquarium. I have a natural filter upstairs on my koi pond, which sounds weird for me to say upstairs on my pond, but upstairs on my koi pond, I built a natural filter. And it's basically water that's pumped out of the aquarium. That water goes through a bunch of lava rock and clay media, and goes and drains right back into the pond. So all that's happening is the bacteria lives in that rock, and it's absorbing the nitrite and the ammonia, and it's putting out cleaner water essentially. And then in that big bed of rock that I built, I also have a bunch of plants in there. Now I have done aquaponics where I've grown vegetables and stuff like that, fruit in the past, and right now I just have some decorative plants in there that are just doing a great job of absorbing the nitrates and cleaning the water. So there's an example of a natural filter, and besides a pump, it doesn't really cost me anything. So now that I've covered all the different types of filters, and I know this is a long video, so thank you if you've made it this far, but now that I've covered all of those different types of filters, and I'm sure there's other filters that I'm missing, box filters as an example is one that I have tucked away down there. It's kind of similar to a sponge filter. There are other filters, but these are kind of the main ones that people see in the hobby. So with all of these, which one is best for you? Well, it really depends, right? It depends, again, on the fish that you're keeping. Do you have plants, no plants, big waste producers, big cichlids, saltwater, etc.? So again, think about what you can deal with and what you don't want to deal with. I would say that for people that watch this video that are into African cichlids, you can use any of these filters. This African cichlid aquarium right behind me is only running on sponge filters, and that thing is packed. The one behind the camera, which you can't see, which is full of mbuna in a 75-gallon aquarium, only has sponge filters. This one has a canister filter on it. We talked about that already, but you could pretty much run hang-on-the-backs, canister filters, sponge filters, internal filters. I've got internal filters in my Oscar tank. So you could run any of those. You could run sumps, obviously. So it really depends on what you're looking for. Now, if you do have a reef aquarium, I'm going to say that because you have a reef, which is very sensitive, you're going to want to make sure that you have certain things in there. And having something like a sump is probably going to be ideal because that is more complex and you are going to have that versatility. You could have a reactor in there to have your chemical filtration. You could have a refugium in there. You could do your protein skimmer in there. So that's probably best. But then I have seen people that have kept reef tanks with a hang-on-a-back filter, and that hang-on-a-back filter has like a little mini skimmer on there, and they can put their chemical filtration in that hang-on-a-back, and it does all the other stuff, and then they just have like a little skimmer on the top of it, and it kind of does a lot of it. But I've also, filtered saltwater aquariums with sponge filters, which some people think I'm crazy for, but it's been many, many months now, and it's been just fine. And it's worked out well for me. So anyway, again, think about what is best for you, what you're willing to put up with, what you're not willing to put up with, what your budget is. Hopefully this video gave you some food for thought, gave you some ideas. I would love to read down below in the comments your thoughts on what I've shared today. What is your favorite type of filter? I did put a poll up on my community tab, so if you're watching this, go over to my community tab and you can vote. I think as of right now, sponge filters is #1, hang-on-the-backs is #2, and canisters is #3, but that could change by the time this video comes out. So anyway, if you like this video, please give it a thumbs up. Please consider subscribing if you have not done so already. That's all I had for now. Thanks for watching. Catch you on the next one.